Mrs. Whitfield, we need to speak with you privately, the FBI agent said, pulling me aside at my son's wedding reception while champagne glasses clinked in celebration around us. Your daughter-in-law is hiding a $50 million fraud scheme, and we believe you might be her next target. I thought they were mistaken, until they showed me photographs of bank records and victim testimonies that made my blood run cold. What I discovered about the woman my son had just married and the action I took afterward tore my family apart, but saved the life savings of dozens of innocent retirees. I'm grateful you're here with me today. Follow my story to the very end and comment what country you're watching from so I can see how far this reaches around the world. At 73, I thought I understood people, but I was about to learn that evil can wear the most beautiful disguise. My name is Eleanor Whitfield, and I've spent 73 years on this earth thinking I was a good judge of character. For 45 years, I worked as head librarian at the Riverside Public Library in Millbrook Heights, Oregon, a small town nestled between rolling hills and pine forests, where everyone knows everyone and secrets don't stay buried long. Population 8,400, where the biggest scandal used to be when Mrs. Henderson's roses won the county fair 3 years running and people whispered about special fertilizers. I raised my son Benjamin as a single mother after my husband David died in a car accident when Ben was only 8 years old. David had been driving home from his construction job on a rainy November evening when a drunk driver ran a red light. Those early years were brutal. Stretching every dollar, working extra shifts at the library, taking on weekend cataloging projects just to keep food on the table and clothes on Ben's growing body. But we made it through together, my boy and I, building a bond that I thought nothing could break. Ben grew up to be everything a mother could hope for: kind, honest, hardworking, with David's gentle nature and my stubborn determination. He became a high school history teacher at Millbrook High, the same school he'd graduated from 18 years earlier. At 35, he was well respected in our community, coached the debate team to 3 state championships, and had never given me a moment of worry. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom craftsman house 3 miles from mine, with a small garden where he grew tomatoes and peppers every summer. We maintained our Sunday dinner tradition religiously: pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans, followed by whatever dessert I'd baked that week. We'd sit at my kitchen table, the same oak table David had built when we were newlyweds, and Ben would tell me about his students, his lesson plans, the small dramas of small-town teaching. He dated occasionally over the years, but nothing serious. He'd say, "I'm waiting for the right one, Mom. Someone special enough to bring to Sunday dinner." My house sits on Maple Street, a tree-lined avenue where I've lived for 37 years. It's a 1940s colonial with blue shutters and a wrap-around porch where I still sit every evening with my tea, watching neighbors walk their dogs and children ride bicycles. I know every crack in the sidewalk, every family story, every triumph and tragedy. This was my world: small, predictable, safe. I had a comfortable retirement after 45 years at the library. My house was paid off, I had a decent pension, and I'd managed to save about $800,000 in various retirement accounts through careful living and smart investments. Not wealthy by city standards, but comfortable enough to help Ben when he needed it, and secure enough to maintain my independence. I volunteered at the literacy center, tended my rose garden, and looked forward to maybe becoming a grandmother someday. I thought I knew my son inside and out. I thought I understood what kind of woman would capture his heart. I was completely, devastatingly wrong. 3 years ago, on a crisp October Sunday, Ben arrived at our usual dinner with an unusual glow in his eyes. His cheeks were flushed and he kept checking his phone, behavior completely unlike my reliable present son. "Mom," he said, barely able to contain his excitement while I carved the pot roast, "I want you to meet someone very special, someone who's changed everything for me." The following week, he brought her home. Catalina Rosenberg walked into my modest living room like she owned the world. She was stunning, about 32 years old, with glossy black hair that caught the light perfectly, emerald green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and a smile that could melt glaciers. She wore a cream-colored silk blouse and tailored black pants that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months. Her jewelry was understated but clearly expensive: a simple gold necklace that caught the light, earrings that looked like real pearls, a watch that probably cost more than Ben's monthly salary. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, taking my hands in hers with practiced warmth, "Ben has told me so much about you. I've been absolutely dying to meet the incredible woman who raised such an amazing man." Her voice had a slight accent that she claimed was from her childhood in Barcelona, though it seemed to come and go depending on her mood or the story she was telling. Everything about her radiated success and sophistication. She moved with confidence, spoke with authority, and had an immediate answer for every question. When I asked about her work, her eyes lit up with apparent passion.
"I run an exclusive investment consulting firm called Rosenberg Financial Solutions," she explained over dinner, gesturing gracefully with her fork. "I specialize in high-yield portfolios for affluent retirees who want their money to work harder than traditional investments allow. I moved to Oregon from San Francisco 6 months ago, seeking a quiet lifestyle while maintaining my lucrative client base through remote consultations and periodic travel." She spoke knowledgeably about market trends, international currencies, and investment strategies that sounded impressive to my librarian ears. When Ben asked her to explain compound interest, she drew diagrams on napkins that made complex financial concepts seem simple and accessible. "I manage about $200 million in assets across Oregon, Washington, and Northern California," she said casually, as if discussing the weather. "My clients are mostly retired executives and business owners who want their money to work harder than traditional banks allow. It's incredibly rewarding to help people secure their golden years and leave legacies for their families." Ben hung on her every word like a man receiving divine revelation. I watched my practical, down-to-earth son transform into someone I barely recognized, constantly checking his phone for her messages, spending money on expensive dinners and weekend getaways that stretched his teacher's salary to the breaking point, talking about investment opportunities and financial growth with the enthusiasm he'd once reserved for discussing historical events with his students. When I gently expressed concern about his finances during one of our private moments, he brushed me off with an uncharacteristic dismissiveness. "Mom, Catalina's teaching me about investments and financial planning. She's shown me how to make my money grow instead of just sitting in a savings account earning nothing. This is how successful people think. You have to spend money to make money, invest in experiences and opportunities." He'd started dressing differently, too. More expensive shirts, nicer shoes, a new watch that he claimed was an investment piece that will hold its value. When I asked where the money was coming from, he explained that Catalina had helped him restructure his finances and access credit he didn't know he had. "She's incredible, Mom. She sees potential everywhere. She's helped me realize that I've been thinking too small my whole life." Over the following 18 months, small inconsistencies began to pile up like storm clouds on the horizon. But I convinced myself I was being an overprotective mother who couldn't accept her son's happiness. Each time doubt crept in, I pushed it away, telling myself that my small-town perspective simply couldn't comprehend the sophisticated world Catalina inhabited. The first red flag should have been her vague living situation. Catalina claimed to have an office in downtown Portland, but when I offered to visit during one of my quarterly trips to the city for medical appointments, she always had elaborate excuses. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm so sorry. We're renovating this week and everything's in chaos," or "I'm actually meeting clients at their location today, but next time for sure." Her business cards were surprisingly vague for someone managing hundreds of millions of dollars. Just Catalina Rosenberg, Senior Investment Consultant, with a phone number and email address. No office address, no company logo, no professional credentials listed. She drove a pristine white Tesla Model S that she'd somehow paid for in cash, and wore different expensive jewelry every time I saw her. Diamond earrings, emerald bracelets, necklaces that caught the light like captured stars. Yet she claimed to live in a modest apartment in Portland that prioritized function over form. When Ben mentioned staying over at her place, his descriptions were always oddly vague and brief. "It's nice, Mom, modern. She keeps it simple because she travels so much for work. Very minimal. Everything is white and clean." But if her lifestyle was so minimal, where did all the expensive clothes and jewelry come from? When I asked about her shopping habits, she laughed and explained that most of her wardrobe consisted of gifts from grateful clients or tax-deductible business expenses. When you're managing people's life savings, Eleanor, appearance matters. Clients need to see success before they trust you with their money. The phone calls were another red flag that should have sent me running. Catalina would receive urgent calls during our family gatherings, always stepping outside or into another room to take them. Through windows, I'd watch her pace frantically, her body language tense and aggressive, gesturing sharply, her face twisted with anger or frustration. This was a stark contrast to the composed, elegant woman who would return minutes later with polite apologies. "Sorry about that," she'd say with that perfect smile, smoothing her hair and straightening her clothes. "One of my clients in Arizona was panicking about some market fluctuations. You know how retirees can get when they see their portfolio values change. They need constant reassurance and hand-holding." But the conversations I overheard through thin walls didn't sound like reassurance. They sounded like arguments, sometimes even threats, delivered in that cold, clipped tone that was so different from her usual warm demeanor. Then there were the financial inconsistencies that should have raised immediate alarms. Catalina insisted on paying for everything when we went out. Expensive dinners at the finest restaurants in Portland, weekend trips to wine country that cost more than I spent in 3 months. Even Ben's car repairs, when his old Honda needed major work, totaling $3,400.
"I believe in investing in experiences and the people I love," she'd say when I politely questioned her generosity, her hand resting possessively on Ben's arm. "My business has been incredibly successful this year, and I want to share that success with Ben's family. Money should be used to create memories and build relationships." For someone who claimed to live modestly, she spent money like it grew on trees. Designer handbags that cost more than some people's monthly rent, spa weekends that included massages, facials, and treatments I'd never heard of, dinners at restaurants where appetizers cost what I typically spent on an entire meal. But the most disturbing red flag came during a family barbecue last summer. I was in the kitchen preparing dessert, my famous apple pie that had won the county fair twice, when I overheard Catalina on the phone in my backyard. She thought she was out of earshot, but her voice carried through the open kitchen window, and for the first time, I heard her real personality emerge. "No, you listen to me," she hissed into the phone, her accent completely gone, replaced by sharp, cold English with an edge that made my skin crawl. "I don't care what your financial advisor told you about diversification. I don't care what your daughter thinks about risk management. The returns I'm generating are triple what any traditional bank could offer. And if you don't trust my expertise, you're welcome to take your money elsewhere." There was a pause, presumably while the person on the other end responded, and then Catalina's voice got even colder. "Mrs. Patterson, you've seen your quarterly statements. Your initial $100,000 investment has grown to $180,000 in just 8 months. Do you really want to throw away that kind of growth because you're listening to people who don't understand advanced investment strategies? You give me another $200,000 by Friday, or you miss out on the biggest opportunity of your lifetime. The choice is yours." When she came back inside 10 minutes later, her warm demeanor had returned completely, like switching on a light. She kissed Ben's cheek, complimented my potato salad, and asked about my roses with apparent genuine interest. "Sorry, Eleanor, client emergency.
You know how it is. Sometimes people need a firm hand to see what's best for them. Investing can be emotional, and emotions make people stupid. I spent that night lying awake thinking about the tone I'd heard in her voice, the casual cruelty, the manipulation, the way she'd spoken about someone who was clearly an elderly woman like they were a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be helped. But when I tried to bring up my concerns with Ben the next day, he became defensive and dismissive. Mom, you don't understand business relationships. Catalina has to be firm with clients sometimes because they get scared and want to make poor decisions based on fear instead of facts. She's protecting their financial futures even when they can't see it themselves. Last Christmas, Ben announced their engagement with tears of joy streaming down his face. We were sitting around my Christmas tree, the same tree I decorated the same way for 30 years, when he dropped to one knee in my living room and pulled out a ring box. Catalina acted surprised, but her shock seemed rehearsed, like she'd practiced the perfect reaction in front of a mirror. She said yes with exactly the right amount of emotion, and Ben slipped an emerald-cut diamond ring onto her finger that must have cost more than his annual salary. The diamond was at least 3 carats, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the Christmas lights like captured fire. "She said yes!" Ben exclaimed, hugging me tight, while Catalina examined her ring with satisfaction. "Mom, I'm the luckiest man alive. I can't believe someone like her would want to spend her life with someone like me." That phrase haunted me. Someone like her wanting someone like me. As if Ben wasn't worthy of love unless the woman was settling for less than she deserved. But I pushed the thought away and focused on his happiness. The wedding planning began immediately, and that's when Catalina's true extravagance revealed itself. She insisted on a celebration at the prestigious Cascade Gardens Resort, a venue typically reserved for Portland's elite, tech executives, politicians, celebrities passing through Oregon. I'd driven past it many times, admiring the manicured grounds and elegant buildings from the road, never imagining I'd set foot inside. When I looked up the pricing online, my hands started shaking. The venue rental alone was $85,000 for a single day. That didn't include catering, flowers, photography, music, or any of the other dozens of expenses that seemed to multiply daily. "Ben," I said carefully during one of our private conversations while he helped me prune my roses, "Henny, how are you affording all this? That venue costs more than you make in 4 years of teaching." He looked uncomfortable but defensive, the way he used to be when he was 12 and I'd caught him sneaking cookies before dinner. "Catalina's covering most of it, Mom. Her business had an incredible year. She closed 3 major new clients in the past 6 months, and she wants our wedding to be perfect. She says we deserve to celebrate properly after everything we've both been through." The guest list grew to 300 people, most of whom I'd never heard of, and Ben admitted he'd never met. When I asked about Catalina's family and friends, her explanations were always vague and shifted depending on when I asked. "Most of my family is still in Spain. The travel would be difficult for them, especially my elderly grandparents. But the next week it would be, my family is scattered across Europe, some in Spain, some in France. It's complicated." Her friends were supposedly mostly clients and business associates who had become like family over the years. "They're so excited to celebrate with us," she'd gush. "Some of them have been asking when I was going to settle down for years. They see Ben as the perfect match for me." As the wedding approached, I noticed Ben becoming increasingly stressed about money. Despite Catalina supposedly covering the major expenses, he was still spending far beyond his means on engagement parties, bachelor events, wedding accessories, and what Catalina called groom's contributions to their new life together. He'd started borrowing money from his retirement fund, something he'd sworn he'd never do, and had even asked me for a $15,000 loan, claiming it was just to match Catalina's contributions and show her family that he was a worthy partner. "She's investing so much in our future, Mom," he explained, sitting at my kitchen table with dark circles under his eyes and stress lines I'd never seen before. The least I can do is show that I'm committed to building something beautiful with her. I want to be the husband she deserves. I gave him the money, of course. He was my son, and seeing him happy was worth more than the dollars in my savings account. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong with a relationship where one partner had to prove their worthiness through financial sacrifice. The wedding details themselves were breathtaking, but excessive. Catalina hired a wedding planner who cost $25,000 just for coordination services. The floral arrangements were being designed by Portland's most exclusive florist, featuring exotic orchids and roses flown in from Ecuador. The catering company was the same one used by the mayor's office for state dinners. Nothing but the best for our special day, Catalina would say whenever I gently questioned the expense. This is a once-in-a-lifetime celebration. We'll remember every detail for the rest of our lives. But I couldn't help wondering whose lifetime savings were funding these memories. June 15th dawned crisp and beautiful, with Oregon's famous roses in full bloom around the Cascade Gardens Resort. The morning air smelled like pine and jasmine, and Mount Hood stood majestically in the distance, its snow-capped peak catching the early sunlight. As I drove through the resort gates, I felt like I was entering a different world, one of manicured perfection and unlimited budgets. I found Ben in the groomsman's suite, adjusting his tie in front of an ornate mirror that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He looked handsome in his charcoal gray tuxedo, but I could see the stress in his eyes, the way his hands trembled slightly as he worked with his cufflinks. "You look so handsome, sweetheart," I said, crossing the room to help him with his boutonniere, a single white rose with baby's breath that matched the ones Catalina had chosen for the ceremony. "Your father would be so proud to see the man you've become." Ben's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment he looked like the 8-year-old boy who'd clung to me at his father's funeral. "I wish he could be here to meet her, Mom. I think he would have loved Catalina. She's so smart and successful. Everything he would have wanted for me." I gave my tongue, remembering David's simple wisdom about judging people by their actions rather than their words, their character rather than their accomplishments. But this was Ben's wedding day, and my doubts had no place in his moment of joy. The ceremony itself was breathtaking in a way that belonged in magazines rather than real life. 300 guests filled white chairs arranged in perfect rows across the resort's main lawn, with Mount Hood providing a dramatic backdrop. The aisle was scattered with rose petals in gradients from white to deep pink, and an arch of white roses and baby's breath framed the altar where my son waited for his bride. Catalina looked like something from a fairy tale in her custom Vera Wang gown, which she had casually mentioned cost $45,000. The dress was ivory silk with intricate beadwork that caught the sunlight, and her veil trailed behind her like a cloud. She walked down the aisle with perfect composure, her smile radiant, every step timed to the string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon. During the vows, I found myself genuinely moved, despite my reservations. Catalina spoke eloquently about finding her anchor in Ben, about how his honesty and kindness had changed her life in ways she never expected. She promised to support his dreams, to build a life of adventure and growth together, to love him with the same steadfast devotion he'd shown her from their first meeting. Ben promised to support her ambitions and adventures, to be her partner in building something beautiful together, to love him with the same dedication he had learned from watching his parents' marriage before his father's death. "You've taught me that love isn't just about feeling safe, it's about growing together, reaching for something bigger than what we could achieve alone." Maybe I had been wrong about her. Maybe my concerns were just the natural protectiveness of a mother learning to share her son's affections with another woman. As I watched them kiss to seal their marriage, I made a conscious decision to let go of my doubts and embrace this new chapter of our family story. The reception was everything Catalina had promised. Elegant, sophisticated, and clearly expensive beyond anything I'd ever experienced. Ice sculptures graced tables laden with food that belonged in fine dining restaurants, lobster bisque, herb-crusted lamb, exotic salads with ingredients I couldn't pronounce. A 12-piece band played while couples danced on a floor that sparkled under crystal chandeliers suspended from the pavilion's ceiling. Open bars served top-shelf liquor, and the wedding cake was a 4-tier masterpiece that required its own table and spotlighting. I circulated among the guests, many of whom I was meeting for the first time despite being family. Catalina had introduced them as business associates, clients, and friends from her investment world. They were predominantly older, well-dressed couples who spoke knowledgeably about markets, portfolios, and retirement planning. Their conversations were peppered with financial terminology that sounded impressive to my small-town years. "Your daughter-in-law has such a gift for making complex investments accessible," one elegant woman named Margaret told me, adjusting her pearl necklace. "She's made my retirement so much more comfortable than I ever imagined possible. My late husband would be amazed at how our savings have grown." Another guest, a distinguished man in his 70s named Robert, shook my hand enthusiastically while his wife beamed beside him. "Eleanor, you must be so proud. Catalina has tripled my wife's inheritance in just 18 months. We're planning a 6-month European cruise thanks to her investment strategies, something we never thought we could afford." As the evening progressed, I began to feel more at ease with Catalina's social circle. These were clearly successful, intelligent people who trusted her with their financial futures. They spoke about her with genuine affection and gratitude, sharing stories of growth, security, and dreams made possible through her guidance. Maybe my small-town librarian's suspicions had been unfounded after all. Maybe I'd been letting my protective instincts cloud my judgment about a woman who was genuinely gifted at helping people build better financial futures. I was standing near the dessert station, admiring the elaborate display of petit fours and chocolate fountains, watching Ben and Catalina share a private moment on the dance floor. They looked perfect together. Him in his elegant tuxedo, her in her flowing gown, both of them glowing with happiness and love. The band was playing At Last by Etta James, and they were lost in each other's eyes, swaying slowly despite the other couples moving around them. For the first time in 3 years, I felt completely at peace with their relationship. The doubts that had plagued me seemed petty and small in the face of such obvious joy. I was thinking about how proud David would have been, how he would have insisted on dancing with the bride and embarrassing Ben with stories from his childhood, when I felt a gentle tap on my shoulder. I turned to find a woman in her 40s with short brown hair and a serious expression, accompanied by a tall man in a navy suit. Both of them looked distinctly out of place among the wedding guests. Their clothes were nice but not expensive, their demeanor professional rather than celebratory. "Mrs. Whitfield?" the woman asked quietly, her voice barely audible over the music and conversation. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen with the FBI, and this is Agent Robert Martinez. We apologize for interrupting your son's wedding, but we need to speak with you urgently about Catalina Rosenberg." The music seemed to fade into background noise as my world tilted on its axis. The champagne glass in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and I had to concentrate on keeping my grip steady. I'm sorry, what? There must be a mistake. This is my son's wedding day. Catalina is... "Ma'am, there's no mistake," Agent Martinez interrupted gently but firmly, glancing toward the dance floor where Catalina was laughing in Ben's arms. "We've been investigating your daughter-in-law for 14 months. She's the primary suspect in a sophisticated Ponzi scheme that's defrauded elderly investors out of over $50 million. My legs felt weak, and I had to grip the edge of the dessert table to steady myself. The elaborate display of sweets suddenly looked obscene in its success. "That's impossible. Catalina runs a legitimate investment firm. Look around. All these people are her satisfied clients. They've been telling me all evening how much money she's made them." Agent Chen's expression grew grimmer, her eyes scanning the crowd of well-dressed guests with what I now recognize as professional assessment rather than admiration. "Mrs. Whitfield, these people aren't satisfied clients. They're victims, and most of them don't know it yet." She pulled out a tablet from her purse and showed me a series of photographs and documents that made my blood run cold. Bank records showing massive transfers between accounts, testimonies from elderly investors who'd lost their life savings, social media posts from Catalina under different names targeting retirees in various cities across the Pacific Northwest.
Your daughter-in-law's real name is Catherine Russo. She's 29 years old, not 32. She has no formal financial training, no legitimate business license, and has been running investment scams since she was 22. She's moved between Oregon, Washington, and California over the past 7 years, targeting specific demographics: wealthy retirees and single men with stable incomes who can provide her with credibility and access.
Agent Martinez pointed to a surveillance photo of Catalina entering a luxury apartment building in San Francisco, her hair dyed blonde and styled differently, wearing clothes I'd never seen. She doesn't live in Portland like she claims. She maintains apartments in 3 different cities under different identities. The office she claims to have in downtown Portland doesn't exist. The address she uses is actually a UPS store in a strip mall. My hands trembled as I processed the information, trying to reconcile the woman I'd welcomed into my family with the criminal these federal agents were describing. But she's so convincing. She knows so much about investments and finance. She explains everything so clearly. She's extremely intelligent and has studied financial terminology extensively, Agent Chen acknowledged. She spends months researching potential victims and investment strategies so she can speak convincingly about market trends and opportunities. But Mrs. Whitfield, every dollar she's used to fund this lavish lifestyle, including this wedding, comes from money stolen from retirees who trusted her with their life savings. I looked around the reception with new eyes, seeing the ice sculptures, the expensive band, the crystal chandeliers through a different lens, all of it purchased with stolen money. The elderly guests I'd been chatting with weren't Catalina's success stories. They were her victims, celebrating their own financial destruction without knowing it. "Why are you telling me this now?" I whispered, my voice barely audible over the celebration continuing around us. "Why today, at their wedding?" Agent Martinez's expression was sympathetic but urgent. "Because we have evidence that suggests you might be her next target, Mrs. Whitfield. We found documents in her San Francisco apartment indicating she's been researching your financial situation extensively, your property values, your retirement accounts, your banking information. Marriage to your son isn't just about love or even long-term financial security, it's about immediate access to your family's assets." The horrible truth began to dawn on me as I watched my son spin his new wife around the dance floor, both of them laughing with pure joy. "She's been planning this for 3 years?" "From the moment she met your son," Agent Chen confirmed grimly. "Every gesture of generosity, every expensive dinner, every display of wealth. It was all calculated to build trust and dependency. She needed your family to see her as successful and generous so you wouldn't question her motives when she eventually approached you about investment opportunities." Agent Chen continued explaining while my world crumbled around me like a sandcastle hit by a wave. The sounds of celebration, laughter, music, clinking glasses became a surreal soundtrack to the destruction of everything I thought I knew about my family's future. "Catherine Russo follows a specific, well-documented pattern," she said, keeping her voice low while showing me more evidence on her tablet. "She targets communities where she can establish credibility through personal relationships. She chooses men who are financially stable but not sophisticated about investments. Teachers, government workers, small business owners, people with steady incomes and good credit but limited knowledge of complex financial instruments." She swiped to show me a map with red pins marking locations across 3 states: Eugene, Oregon, Bellingham, Washington, Sacramento, California, Spokane, Washington. Each pin represents a previous operation. She typically spends 2 to 3 years in each community building relationships, establishing trust, and systematically draining retirement accounts before moving on to the next community. Agent Martinez handed me printed emails that made my stomach churn with their calculated coldness. Messages between Catalina and someone named Marcus discussing what they called the Oregon operation and Phase 2 implementation.
The conversations were filled with references to the old lady who owned significant real estate assets and maintained substantial retirement funds. The old lady, I repeated numbly, the words tasting like poison in my mouth. She means me. Yes, ma'am. We believe your son's marriage was planned as step one of a long-term financial exploitation scheme. Catherine has been building trust and establishing herself as a family member so she can eventually gain access to your assets through manipulation, legal maneuvering, or outright theft. Agent Chen showed me more printed communications that revealed the depths of the conspiracy. Messages discussing my emotional vulnerability as a widowed retiree, my strong attachment to my son, and specific strategies for isolating me from other family members or friends who might question large financial transactions. Look at this timeline, she said, pointing to a document that made my blood freeze. 3 months after the wedding, she plans to approach you about helping Ben and her buy a house by co-signing a large mortgage. 6 months after that, she'll suggest you consolidate your retirement accounts under her management for better returns. Within 18 months, she projects having access to your entire financial portfolio.
She's been planning this for 3 years? I asked again, my voice breaking. From the moment she identified your son as a target, Agent Chen confirmed. Every gift, every expensive dinner, every gesture of generosity, it was all funded by money stolen from previous victims. She's been using other people's retirement savings to create the illusion of success that convinced your son to trust her. The cruelest revelation came in the form of recorded phone conversations. Agent Chen handed me wireless earbuds connected to her phone. This was recorded last month from surveillance equipment in her San Francisco apartment, she said gently. We're sorry you have to hear this, but you need to understand what we're dealing with. Catalina's voice came through the earbuds with crystal clarity, speaking to an unknown associate in a tone completely devoid of the warmth and affection I'd grown accustomed to. The old woman is absolutely perfect, isolated, trusting, and sitting on at least $2 million between her house equity and retirement accounts. The son is completely under control, totally devoted to making me happy. Once I'm legally family, it'll be simple to convince her that I'm helping manage her finances for their benefit. Another voice responded, male and equally cold. What about the husband? Will he be a problem? Catalina's laugh was sharp and cruel, nothing like the melodious sound I'd heard at family dinners. He's a small-town teacher who thinks he won the lottery by landing someone like me. I could convince him his mother needs to invest her retirement money in unicorn farms if I wanted to. By this time next year, we'll have cleaned out the entire family and moved on to the next operation. And if she gets suspicious, she won't. I've been the perfect daughter-in-law for 3 years. Generous, loving, successful. She sees me as her son's salvation, his ticket to a better life. By the time she realizes what's happening, her accounts will be empty and we'll be long gone. I removed the earbuds with shaking hands, feeling physically ill. The wedding cake I had enjoyed earlier threatened to come back up, and I had to grip the dessert table to keep from falling. The woman my son had just married, the woman I'd been trying to accept and welcome into our family, saw us as nothing more than financial targets to be exploited and discarded. Every smile, every hug, every "I love you, Eleanor" had been a calculated performance designed to lower my defenses. Mrs. Whitfield, I know this is overwhelming, Agent Chen said softly, placing a steadying hand on my arm. But we need you to understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. Catherine Russo isn't just stealing money, she's destroying lives. Agent Martinez opened a thick manila folder and spread photographs across the polished oak table. Each photo showed an elderly person, and each had a story that made my heart break a little more each. This is Harold Pemberton, 78 years old, retired from Boeing. Catherine convinced him to move his entire pension, $800,000, into her exclusive high-yield fund. He lost everything.
He's now living in a studio apartment and working as a grocery store greeter to pay for his medication. The next photo showed an elegant woman in her 70s. Margaret Chen, no relation to Agent Chen, was a retired nurse from Seattle. Catherine took $1.2 million from her over 18 months. Margaret had to sell her house and move in with her daughter. The stress triggered a heart attack that she's still recovering from. Photo after photo, story after story. Retired teachers, small business owners, widows and widowers who had trusted Catherine with their life savings. Each face represented decades of hard work, careful saving, and dreams for a secure retirement, all destroyed by the woman who is now my daughter-in-law. "How many victims are there?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We've identified 43 confirmed victims across 3 states, but we suspect there are more who haven't come forward yet. Some people are too embarrassed to admit they were deceived. Others may not even realize they've been victimized if Catherine is still making small payments to maintain the illusion." I looked back toward the reception, where Catalina was now chatting with a group of elderly guests, her hand resting affectionately on the arm of a woman who looked to be in her 80s. The sight made me feel sick. Those people at the reception? Are they all victims?
Most of them, yes. Catherine brings her active marks to social events to reinforce the illusion of success and community. It's a classic confidence trick. Surround the new target with apparent success stories to build credibility. Agent Martinez leaned forward, his expression serious but compassionate. "Mrs. Whitfield, we need your help. We've been building this case for over a year, but Catherine is extremely careful about covering her tracks. She moves money through multiple accounts, uses false identities, and manipulates her victims emotionally to prevent them from going to authorities." "What do you want me to do?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer would tear my family apart. "We need you to help us catch her in the act," Agent Chen said. "We need evidence of her attempting to defraud you, recorded conversations, documentation of her accessing your accounts, proof that she's using the same methods we've seen with other victims." The weight of what they were asking hit me like a physical blow. They wanted me to pretend everything was normal, to let my son continue believing he'd married the woman of his dreams while secretly working to send his wife to prison. "You're asking me to destroy my son's life," I said. "Mrs. Whitfield, Catherine Russo has already destroyed your son's life. He just doesn't know it yet." Over the next hour, hidden away in that library while my son's wedding reception continued without me, I learned the full extent of Catherine's manipulation of my family. Agent Shen showed me financial records that painted a devastating picture of Ben's situation. "Your son's credit has been systematically destroyed over the past 2 years," she explained, pulling up documents on her tablet. Catherine convinced him to take out multiple credit cards and personal loans to match her investment in their relationship. He currently owes $87,000 in credit card debt and $45,000 in personal loans. My hands shook as I looked at the numbers. That's impossible. Ben is careful with money. He's always been responsible about finances. Catherine is an expert at financial manipulation, Agent Martinez explained. She convinced him that debt was just a tool for building wealth, that successful people leveraged credit to create opportunities. Look at these receipts. The evidence was damning. Expensive dinners that Ben had paid for, thinking he was impressing Catherine with his generosity. Weekend trips that she'd suggested, but somehow ended up on his credit cards. Even the engagement ring, which I'd assumed she'd helped him afford, had been purchased entirely with borrowed money at an interest rate that would keep him paying for decades. She's been systematically isolating him from financial reality, Agent Chen continued. Notice how his spending patterns changed after they met. Before Catherine, Ben spent an average of $2,800 per month. After meeting her, his monthly expenses jumped to over $6,000. I thought about our recent conversations, how stressed Ben had seemed about money, how he'd asked me for that $15,000 loan. I'd attributed it to normal wedding expenses, never imagining that my frugal son had been manipulated into financial ruin. "There's more," Agent Martinez said grimly. "Catherine has been accessing Ben's accounts without his knowledge.
She has his online banking passwords, his credit card information, even his social security number. She's been monitoring his finances and making small withdrawals that he hasn't noticed. They showed me bank statements with highlighted transactions. $200 here, $500 there, always small enough to avoid suspicion, but adding up to thousands of dollars over time. "Why haven't you arrested her already?" I demanded. "You have all this evidence." Financial fraud cases require proving intent to deceive. Catherine is careful to maintain plausible explanations for everything. The money she's taken from Ben could be explained as relationship expenses or shared costs. The debt could be seen as poor decision-making rather than manipulation. But the other victims have been convinced to make voluntary transfers to her investment accounts. Legally, it's their money to lose unless we can prove she never intended to invest it legitimately. That's why we need to catch her in the act of defrauding someone new. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of laughter from the reception. Through the library windows, I could see Ben spinning Catherine around the dance floor, both of them glowing with happiness. My heart broke watching them, knowing that my son's joy was built on lies and manipulation. How long do I have before she approaches me about investments? Agent Chen consulted her notes. Based on her previous patterns, probably 6 to 8 weeks. She'll let the wedding excitement die down, then start mentioning opportunities casually. She'll begin by asking about your retirement plans, expressing concern about inflation affecting fixed incomes, that sort of thing. And you want me to play along? We want her to let her make her pitch, but to be very careful about protecting your actual assets. We'll help you set up monitored accounts with limited funds that she can access safely. The key is to get her on record making false promises about returns and investment strategies. Agent Martinez handed me a business card. "Mrs. Whitfield, I understand this is an impossible situation. You're being asked to choose between protecting yourself and protecting your son's happiness, but here's what you need to understand. Catherine Russo will eventually drain your accounts and disappear whether you cooperate with us or not. At least this way, we can minimize the damage and prevent her from victimizing other families."
As the reception wound down and guests began to leave, Agent Chen explained the psychological techniques Catherine used to control her victims. Understanding her methods was crucial if I was going to successfully work undercover to expose her. Catherine is what we call a romance scammer with financial expertise, Agent Chen said as we watched through the window as my son said goodbye to wedding guests. She combines emotional manipulation with just enough financial knowledge to sound credible. It's an incredibly effective combination. She showed me a psychological profile that had been compiled by FBI behavioral analysts. Catherine's approach involved what they called strategic vulnerability. She would share carefully crafted personal stories to build emotional connections while positioning herself as slightly damaged and in need of protection. Notice how she told you about her family being in Spain, how she moved to Oregon seeking a quieter life. Those weren't random details. She was establishing herself as someone who had experienced loss and displacement, making her more sympathetic and relatable. The profile revealed that Catherine had never lived in Spain. She was born in Detroit and had grown up in foster care before aging out of the system at 18. Her slight accent was completely fabricated, something she'd learned from watching foreign films and practicing with voice coaches. She studies her targets extensively before making contact, Agent Martinez explained. She knew about Ben's father's death, your role as a single mother, your work at the library. She crafted her personality to appeal specifically to what she knew about your family dynamic. They showed me evidence of Catherine's research methods, public record searches, social media monitoring, even conversations with Ben's colleagues where she'd pumped them for information about his background and family situation. She knew Ben was lonely and had never been in a serious relationship. She knew he felt inadequate about his income compared to his college friends who'd gone into business or technology. She positioned herself as someone who could elevate his status while making him feel like he was doing her a favor by being so steadfast and loyal. The manipulation extended to her financial presentations. Catherine would use real market data and legitimate investment terminology, but twist them to support fictitious opportunities. She'd show potential victims actual portfolios that had performed well, claiming they represented her clients' accounts when they were actually publicly available information about successful hedge funds. She's incredibly skilled at reading people's emotional triggers, Agent Chen continued. With retirees, she focuses on fear of inflation, fear of medical expenses, fear of becoming a burden to their children. With younger targets, like Ben, she emphasizes aspiration, the desire to provide for family, to build wealth, to achieve success. But perhaps most disturbing was Catherine's approach to building trust through manufactured crises. She would create small emergencies, a client emergency call during family dinner, a brief health scare, a financial setback that she handled with grace, that allowed her to demonstrate vulnerability while also showing her competence under pressure. These crisis moments serve multiple purposes, Agent Martinez explained. They interrupt normal social interactions so victims don't have time to think critically about inconsistencies. They make Catherine appear vulnerable and human, and they create opportunities for her to demonstrate skills or knowledge that reinforce her credibility. I thought about all the times Catherine had received urgent phone calls during our family gatherings, how she'd handled them with such professional composure, how impressed Ben had been with her ability to manage difficult clients. It had all been theater designed to manipulate our perceptions. The wedding itself is part of the con, Agent Chen added. The expense demonstrates apparent success. The venue provides social proof, and the legal marriage gives her legitimate access to family financial information. Every detail was calculated for maximum psychological impact. They showed me photos from Catherine's previous marriages, 3 other weddings in different states, each expensive and elaborate, each ending in divorce after she had drained her husband's accounts and moved on to the next location. Ben isn't her first teacher, Agent Martinez said grimly. Teachers are ideal targets because they have steady incomes, good credit, and pension funds, but they typically lack sophisticated knowledge about complex investments. They're also naturally trusting and focused on helping others, qualities Catherine exploits ruthlessly. As the reception finally began to wind down, Agent Chen and Agent Martinez gave me detailed information about the wedding guests who were actually Catherine's victims. Understanding their stories would help me recognize the signs when Catherine eventually approached me about investments. The elderly woman you spoke with earlier, Margaret Patterson, has been one of Catherine's victims for 8 months. Agent Chen explained, showing me a surveillance photo of the elegant woman who'd complimented Catherine's investment skills. She's given Catherine $340,000 so far, believing it's been invested in emerging markets funds.
Margaret's story was heartbreaking. A retired nurse whose husband had died 2 years earlier, she'd been struggling with loneliness when Catherine approached her at a coffee shop in Portland. Catherine had struck up a conversation about the difficulty of managing finances alone, gradually building a friendship before introducing investment opportunities. Margaret thinks she's made $150,000 in profits, Agent Martinez continued. Catherine sends her monthly statements showing steady growth. What Margaret doesn't know is that her returns are being paid with money stolen from newer victims. It's a classic Ponzi scheme structure. The distinguished man I'd met, Robert Chen, no relation to Agent Chen, had an even more devastating story. He'd been Catherine's victim for over a year, gradually transferring his wife's life insurance payout, $800,000, into what he believed were high-yield bond funds. Robert's wife died of cancer 18 months ago, Agent Chen explained. Catherine met him at a grief support group where she claimed to be dealing with the financial stress of caring for her supposedly sick mother. She positioned herself as someone who understood his loss while also needing his help managing family finances.
Catherine had convinced Robert that his wife would have wanted him to make the most of her life insurance money, playing on his guilt and grief to overcome his natural financial caution. She'd even arranged for him to receive flowers on his wife's birthday, supposedly from his investment profits, to reinforce the emotional manipulation. Every victim here has a similar story, Agent Martinez said, scanning the remaining wedding guests. Catherine identifies their emotional vulnerabilities: grief, loneliness, financial anxiety, desire to help family, and crafts her approach specifically to exploit those weaknesses. They pointed out other victims among the wedding guests: a retired postal worker who'd given Catherine his entire pension rollover, believing it was invested in government securities; a widow who'd liquidated her husband's stock portfolio to take advantage of what Catherine called once-in-a-lifetime precious metals opportunities; a former small business owner who'd mortgaged his paid-off house to fund what he thought was a restaurant investment syndicate. The cruelest part, Agent Chen said, is that Catherine maintains genuine relationships with these people. She remembers their grandchildren's names, sends birthday cards, attends their family events. The emotional manipulation continues even as she's stealing from them. I watched these elderly victims saying goodbye to Catherine, hugging her warmly, thanking her for including them in the celebration. They genuinely cared about her, and she was systematically destroying their financial security while accepting their affection and gratitude. How can she live with herself? I asked. Sociopaths don't experience guilt or empathy the way normal people do. Catherine sees her victims as resources to be managed rather than people to be protected. She's remarkably skilled at compartmentalizing her emotions and maintaining multiple personas simultaneously. They showed me psychological evaluations from Catherine's previous arrests. She'd been caught running smaller scams twice before, but had served minimal jail time due to plea bargains and good behavior. The evaluations described someone with above-average intelligence, exceptional social skills, and a complete absence of conscience regarding financial crimes. She genuinely enjoys the intellectual challenge of managing complex deceptions. For Catherine, each victim is like a puzzle to solve: how to gain their trust, access their money, and maintain their loyalty even while stealing from them. The most disturbing revelation was that Catherine often maintained contact with previous victims even after moving to new locations. She would send occasional updates about their investments, sometimes even returning small amounts of money to maintain credibility, all while using their testimonials to recruit new victims. Some of her earliest victims still believe they're making money. Agent Martinez explained, she's been stringing along a retired couple in Sacramento for over 4 years, sending them small monthly payments that they think are investment returns. They have no idea their principal is gone, and they're being paid with money stolen from people like the guests at this wedding. As the last wedding guests departed and Ben and Catherine prepared to leave for their honeymoon in Maui, another expense that Ben had unknowingly financed with borrowed money, the FBI agents outlined their plan for catching Catherine in the act of attempting to defraud me. The key is patience, Agent Chen emphasized as we sat in the now empty library, surrounded by the evidence of Catherine's crimes. We can't rush this or she'll become suspicious. Catherine is extremely careful about timing her approaches to new victims. They explained that I would need to continue behaving normally, attending family dinners, maintaining my relationship with Ben and Catherine, while secretly documenting everything and preparing for the eventual investigation request. Based on her previous patterns, Catherine will start with casual conversations about financial planning. She'll express concern about inflation, mention how well her other clients are doing, maybe bring up news stories about retirees running out of money. The FBI would provide me with special recording equipment disguised as everyday items, a pen, a purse, a watch, that could capture high-quality audio of our conversations. They'd also help me set up monitored bank accounts with limited funds that Catherine could access if she convinced me to make initial investments. We need her to make specific false claims about investment returns and use your money for personal expenses rather than legitimate investments, Agent Chen explained. That establishes clear intent to defraud rather than just poor investment management. They showed me examples of the evidence they needed: Recorded conversations where Catherine promised specific returns that were mathematically impossible. Documentation of her using victim funds for personal expenses like rent, travel, or luxury purchases. Proof that she was lying about the existence of investment accounts or business partnerships. The challenge is that Catherine is very sophisticated about avoiding direct promises, Agent Martinez warned. She'll use phrases like, historically, these investments have returned, or my clients typically see, rather than making specific guarantees. We need to get her to be more explicit about expected returns. They explained that I would need to play the role of an eager but slightly skeptical potential investor. Too much enthusiasm would seem suspicious, but too much resistance would cause Catherine to back off and wait for a better opportunity. Ask questions that a normal person would ask, but don't be too sophisticated about financial terminology, Agent Chen advised. Catherine needs to feel like she's educating you rather than being challenged by someone who might understand her deception. The most difficult aspect would be maintaining my relationship with Ben while secretly investigating his wife. The agents emphasized that Ben couldn't know about the investigation, his reaction would be too obvious, and Catherine would immediately become suspicious. Your son is completely under her influence, Agent Martinez said gently. If you tell him what we've told you, he'll either confront Catherine directly or accidentally reveal the investigation through changes in his behavior. Either way, she'll disappear and continue victimizing people in another state. They provided me with a secure phone number I could call if Catherine behaved unexpectedly or if I felt unsafe at any point. They also gave me the contact information for victim services, acknowledging that this process would be emotionally devastating for me, regardless of the outcome. Mrs. Whitfield, we understand that we're asking you to risk your relationship with your son, but Catherine is going to steal from you whether you cooperate with us or not. The only question is whether we can catch her doing it and prevent her from destroying other families. The agents also explained what would happen after Catherine was arrested. Ben would likely need counseling to deal with the trauma of discovering that his marriage was built on lies. There would be media attention, court proceedings, and the possibility that some of the stolen money might never be recovered. Most victims need months or years to fully process what happened to them. The emotional manipulation is often more damaging than the financial losses. Your son will need professional help and a strong support system. They offered to connect me with counselors who specialized in helping families of fraud victims, as well as support groups for people who'd experienced similar situations. The most important thing to remember is that none of this is your fault or Ben's fault. Catherine is a professional criminal who has spent years perfecting these techniques. Intelligent, careful people fall victim to these scams because they're specifically designed to exploit normal human psychology. Ben and Catherine left for their honeymoon the morning after the wedding, and I found myself alone with the devastating knowledge of what my daughter-in-law really was. The house felt different, empty in a way that had nothing to do with Ben's absence, and everything to do with the terrible secret I was now carrying. I spent the first few days after they left just trying to process what I'd learned. Every memory of Catherine seemed different now, tainted by the knowledge of her true nature. The expensive gifts, the generous dinners, the loving way she'd spoken about building a future with Ben, it had all been calculated manipulation designed to set up their long-term theft of my assets. Agent Chen called daily to check on me and provide updates on the investigation. They were using Ben and Catherine's absence to conduct surveillance of Catherine's real apartment in San Francisco, documenting her actual lifestyle and gathering more evidence about her methods. We've confirmed that Catherine is currently managing active frauds in 3 states. While she's been focused on your family, she's been maintaining her other victims through phone calls and electronic transfers. She's stealing from people every day. The agents had also discovered additional victims who hadn't been identified before, retirees in smaller towns who'd been too embarrassed to report their losses, or hadn't realized they'd been victimized because Catherine was still sending them small monthly payments. Every day she remains free, more people lose their life savings, Agent Martinez added when he joined one of our calls. Your willingness to help us build this case could prevent dozens of families from going through what you're experiencing.
During this waiting period, I found myself researching financial fraud online, trying to understand how I'd missed the warning signs that now seemed so obvious. The FBI had provided me with educational materials about romance scams and investment fraud, and the patterns were eerily familiar. Catherine had used classic techniques: love bombing, overwhelming Ben with affection and attention; financial entanglement, gradually intertwining their expenses and debts; isolation, subtly discouraging Ben from seeking financial advice from others; and manufactured urgency, creating time pressure around investment opportunities. I also learned about the psychological impact on victims' families. Children and spouses of fraud victims often experienced what psychologists called secondary trauma: guilt about not recognizing the signs, anger at their loved one for being deceived, and helplessness about being unable to prevent the losses. The hardest part was maintaining normal communication with Ben during their honeymoon. He called every few days, excited about their adventures in Hawaii, completely unaware that his new wife was a criminal who had already financially destroyed him. "Mom, Catherine found this amazing restaurant that overlooks the ocean," he told me during one call, his voice full of joy. "We're having the most incredible time. She knows so much about different cuisines and cultures. I'm learning so much from her." I forced myself to sound happy and supportive, asking about their activities and expressing appropriate enthusiasm for their experiences. Meanwhile, I knew that every expensive dinner, every luxury excursion, every romantic sunset cruise was being paid for with money stolen from elderly retirees who trusted Catherine with their life savings. "She's already talking about planning a trip to Europe for our first anniversary," Ben continued. "She says she wants to show me Barcelona, where she grew up. Can you imagine, Mom? Me in Europe?" I bit my tongue to keep from revealing that Catherine had never lived in Barcelona, that her accent was fake, that her entire persona was a carefully constructed lie designed to manipulate him. Instead, I made appropriate sounds of excitement and told him that how happy I was that he'd found someone who could open up new worlds for him. The FBI had warned me that maintaining these conversations would be emotionally exhausting, but I hadn't anticipated how physically painful it would be to lie to my son while he shared his happiness with me. During their absence, I also spent time with victim services counselors, preparing myself for the eventual confrontation and its aftermath. They helped me understand that Ben would likely go through a predictable series of emotional stages when he learned the truth: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and eventually acceptance. Many fraud victims initially blame the people who expose the truth rather than the criminals who deceive them, my counselor explained. "Your son may be angry with you for working with the FBI before he's able to be angry with Catherine for lying to him." The counselors also helped me prepare for the possibility that Ben might never fully forgive me for my role in exposing Catherine, even though I was trying to protect him and other potential victims. "Some families never recover from the trauma of financial fraud," the counselor acknowledged. "The deception cuts so deep that it damages trust permanently. But doing nothing would guarantee that both you and your son would lose everything, and Catherine would continue destroying other families." Ben and Catherine returned from their honeymoon in early July, tanned and glowing with happiness. Catherine brought me a beautiful silk scarf from Maui and a coffee table book about Hawaiian culture, both thoughtful gifts that would have touched me deeply if I hadn't known they were purchased with stolen money. "Eleanor, you have to come visit us in our new house," Catherine said as we sat in my living room, sharing photos from their trip. "We're looking at some beautiful properties in the hills outside Portland. Ben deserves something special after all his hard work." I knew from the FBI briefings that Catherine was already setting up the next phase of her plan, convincing Ben to buy an expensive house that would require my financial assistance as a co-signer or down payment contributor. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, trying to keep my voice neutral. "But aren't houses in that area quite expensive?" "Oh, Eleanor, you can't think of real estate as an expense," Catherine laughed, her hand resting on Ben's arm. "It's an investment.
Property values in Portland have been rising steadily, and Ben's teaching position provides excellent job security for mortgage qualification. She spoke with the same confident authority as she'd used when discussing her investment business, making home ownership sound like a guaranteed path to wealth, rather than a significant financial risk. Plus, I've been helping Ben understand how to leverage his income more effectively. There are so many financial tools available to people with good credit and steady employment. Most people just don't know how to access them. Ben nodded enthusiastically, clearly proud of his wife's financial expertise. Catherine has taught me so much about building wealth instead of just earning money. I had no idea how much opportunity I was missing by being too conservative with my finances.
Over the following weeks, Catherine began implementing exactly the approach the FBI had predicted. She would make casual comments about market conditions, express concern about inflation affecting retirees on fixed incomes, and mention how well her investment clients were performing compared to traditional retirement accounts. Eleanor, I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you looked at your retirement portfolio lately? She asked during one of our Sunday dinners in late July. I've been reading about how inflation is really hurting people who keep their money in CDs and government bonds. The question seemed casual, caring even, but I knew it was the beginning of her systematic assessment of my financial vulnerability. I try not to worry too much about money, I replied, following the FBI's guidance to appear modestly concerned but not sophisticated about investment strategies. I figure I've made it this far and my pension covers my basic expenses. Oh, but Eleanor, you should be thinking about growth, not just maintenance, Catherine said with apparent sincerity. People are living longer than ever, and medical expenses are rising faster than inflation. You want to make sure your money lasts and maybe even grows enough to leave something for Ben's children someday. She began sharing stories about her other clients, carefully edited versions of the victims I'd seen at the wedding, describing how she'd helped them achieve financial security through strategic investments. I have a client, Margaret, who was in a very similar situation to yours, Catherine said, referring to Margaret Patterson, whom I now knew had actually lost over $300,000 to Catherine's schemes. Retired, living on a pension, worried about the future. I helped her diversify into some higher yield opportunities, and she's been able to travel, help her grandchildren, really enjoy her retirement instead of just surviving it. The manipulation was masterful. Catherine was positioning herself as someone who cared about my well-being while subtly suggesting that my current financial approach was inadequate and potentially dangerous. What kind of opportunities? I asked, trying to sound curious but cautious. Oh, there are so many options for people with your profile, Catherine replied. International bond funds, emerging market securities, precious metals portfolios. The key is finding the right mix for your risk tolerance and timeline. She spoke with such apparent expertise, using terminology that sounded impressive and sophisticated. If I hadn't known she was a fraud, I might have been convinced by her presentation. Over the next several weeks, Catherine gradually escalated her financial discussions, always framing them as concern for my welfare rather than sales pitches. She would bring up news stories about retirees running out of money, mention market opportunities that her other clients were benefiting from, and express subtle worry about my long-term financial security. The thing is, Eleanor, your generation saved so responsibly and did everything right, but the economic rules have changed. What worked for your parents' generation doesn't provide the same security anymore. You have to be more proactive about making your money work for you. I would never want to pressure you into anything, she always concluded these conversations. But if you ever want to learn more about some of the opportunities I help my clients with, I'd be happy to show you some examples. No obligation, of course, just education so you can make informed decisions about your future. The FBI had prepared me for exactly this progression, but experiencing Catherine's manipulation firsthand was both fascinating and terrifying. She was remarkably skilled at reading my responses and adjusting her approach accordingly, always staying just on the edge of my comfort zone without pushing too hard or too fast. As August approached, I knew that Catherine would soon make her formal investment proposal, and I would need to be ready to play my role in the sting operation that would hopefully end her criminal career and prevent her from destroying more families like mine.
By early September, Catherine was ready to make her move. The FBI had prepared me for this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the emotional toll of watching my daughter-in-law attempt to systematically defraud me while my son sat beside her, completely oblivious to what was happening. Catherine had arranged what she called a family financial planning session at their temporary apartment in Portland. Ben was so excited about what he believed would be his mother finally getting professional investment advice that he'd taken the afternoon off from school to attend. "Mom, this is going to change everything for you. Catherine has helped me understand so much about money management. She's going to show you opportunities I never knew existed."
Catherine had prepared an impressive presentation, complete with charts, graphs, and official-looking documents that appeared to show the performance of various investment portfolios. The FBI recording equipment, hidden in my purse, was capturing every word as she launched into her carefully rehearsed pitch. "Eleanor, I've been thinking about your situation, and I believe I can help you achieve something remarkable," Catherine began, her voice warm and professional. "Most retirees think their earning years are behind them, but that's simply not true if you know how to position your assets correctly." She spread out documents on the coffee table that claimed to show investment returns of 18 to 24% annually, numbers that should have been immediate red flags, but were presented so convincingly that even I found myself momentarily impressed. "These are the actual returns my clients have achieved over the past 3 years," she continued, pointing to carefully fabricated charts. "Compare that to traditional retirement accounts earning 2 to 4% annually, and you can see why I'm so passionate about helping families like yours." Ben leaned forward, studying the documents with obvious amazement. "Mom, look at these numbers. Catherine's clients are earning in 1 year what your savings account earns in a decade." Catherine smiled at his enthusiasm while launching into a detailed explanation of what she called international arbitrage opportunities and emerging market securities. The terminology was impressive and sophisticated, designed to make her sound like a legitimate financial expert, rather than a career criminal. "The beauty of these investments is that they're completely legal and regulated by international financial authorities," she explained, showing me documents that looked official but which I knew were fabricated. "The returns are high because we're taking advantage of currency fluctuations and market inefficiencies that most American investors simply don't know about." She painted a picture of financial security that was incredibly appealing. According to her projections, my $800,000 in retirement savings could grow to over $2 million within 5 years, providing me with enough income to travel, help Ben buy a house, and leave a substantial inheritance for future grandchildren. "Now, Eleanor, I want you to imagine what your life could look like," Catherine said, her voice taking on an almost hypnotic quality. "Instead of worrying about medical expenses or whether your money will last, you could be planning European vacations, helping Ben and me start a family, maybe even buying that beach house you mentioned dreaming about." The emotional manipulation was masterful. Catherine had clearly studied my conversations with Ben over the years, identifying my fears about becoming a financial burden and my dreams about being able to help my family build a better future. "But Catherine," I said, following the FBI script, "these returns seem too good to be true. How can you guarantee such high performance?" "Oh, Catherine, I never guarantee anything," Catherine replied smoothly, "but I can show you the historical performance and explain why these opportunities exist. The key is understanding that traditional American financial institutions have a vested interest in keeping these options away from individual investors." She launched into a conspiracy theory about how banks and traditional financial advisors deliberately kept their clients in low-performing investments to maintain their own profits. It was a classic scam technique, positioning herself as someone who was sharing secret knowledge that they didn't want ordinary people to have. The truth is, Eleanor, people like us, working families, teachers, retirees, were seen as cash cows by the traditional financial industry. They want to keep us earning just enough to feel secure, but never enough to achieve real financial independence. Ben nodded along enthusiastically, completely buying into Catherine's narrative. "It makes so much sense, Mom. Think about how little your bank pays you in interest. They're using your money to make huge profits while giving you almost nothing in return."
As Catherine's presentation continued, I found myself genuinely impressed by her sophistication and preparation. Even knowing she was a criminal, I could understand how intelligent people fell victim to her schemes. She had answers for every question, explanations for every concern, and documentation that looked completely legitimate. "Now, Eleanor, I don't want you to feel any pressure," Catherine said as she reached the climax of her presentation, "but I do have an opportunity available right now that I think would be perfect for someone in your situation." She explained what she called an international emerging market fund that was supposedly accepting new investors for a limited time. According to Catherine, this fund had achieved 28% returns over the past 18 months by investing in technology companies in Southeast Asia and renewable energy projects in South America. "The minimum investment is typically $500,000, Catherine continued. "But because you're family, I can get you in with just $200,000 to start. If you're comfortable with the results after 6 months, we can move more of your portfolio over gradually." The FBI had briefed me to expect exactly this approach, starting with a significant but not overwhelming amount to establish trust before gradually accessing larger portions of my assets. $200,000, I repeated, trying to sound both interested and nervous. "That's a quarter of my retirement savings." "I understand that seems like a lot," Catherine replied with apparent sympathy. "But Eleanor, think about it this way. If this investment performs the way I expect, that $200,000 could become $350,000 within 2 years. That's more than you'd earn in traditional investments over a decade."
Ben was practically bouncing with excitement. "Mom, this is incredible. Catherine is offering you the same opportunities she provides to millionaires. Do you realize how lucky we are?" Catherine reached across the table and took my hands in hers, a gesture that would have seemed caring if I hadn't known her true nature. "Eleanor, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I don't offer these opportunities to just anyone, but you're family now, and I want to see you secure and comfortable for the rest of your life." The manipulation was so skillful that I had to remind myself that every word was a lie designed to steal my life savings. Catherine continued building emotional pressure while maintaining her facade of caring concern. "I've already spoken to my fund manager about including you in this investment round," she said, showing me what appeared to be official emails confirming my potential participation. "But we need to move quickly because they're closing this opportunity to new investors at the end of the month." This manufactured urgency was another classic scam technique, creating time pressure to prevent potential victims from seeking outside advice or thinking too carefully about the decision. "What would I need to do?" I asked, playing my role perfectly. Catherine pulled out a stack of papers that looked impressively official. "Just some basic paperwork to open your international investment account. We'll need to transfer the funds to the custodial bank, which handles all the transactions securely." She walked me through documents that appeared to be legitimate investment agreements, but which I knew were designed to give her complete access to my money. The custodial bank was actually an account controlled entirely by Catherine, and the International Investment Fund existed only in the fabricated documents she'd prepared. "Eleanor, I want you to know that your money will be completely safe," Catherine assured me as I pretended to review the paperwork. "These investments are regulated by international financial authorities, and you'll receive monthly statements showing exactly how your portfolio is performing." Ben was reading over my shoulder, clearly amazed by what he perceived as his wife's generosity and expertise. "Mom, Catherine is basically giving you access to her professional network. This is the kind of opportunity that usually requires millions of dollars to access." As Catherine guided me through the fraudulent paperwork, explaining how I would need to wire $200,000 to her custodial account within 48 hours to secure my position in the investment fund, I gave the signal we'd arranged with the FBI. I excused myself to use the bathroom and sent a simple text message. "Ready." Within minutes, I heard a firm knock at the apartment door. Catherine looked surprised but not alarmed. She had no idea that her carefully constructed world was about to collapse. "Are you expecting someone?" Ben asked, glancing toward the door.
No, probably just a neighbor, Catherine replied, but I could see a flicker of concern in her eyes as the knocking continued, more insistent now. Catherine Russo, this is the FBI. We have a warrant for your arrest. Open the door immediately. The color drained from Catherine's face so quickly that for a moment I thought she might faint. Ben looked confused, then horrified, as the reality of what was happening began to sink in. What's going on? Ben demanded, looking between Catherine and me. Why are the FBI here? Catherine, what are they talking about? Catherine's composure cracked completely. The sophisticated, confident woman who had been manipulating my family for 3 years suddenly looked like what she really was, a scared young criminal who had finally been caught. I can explain, but her voice was shaking and her accent had completely disappeared. Agent Chen and Agent Martinez entered the apartment with several other federal agents, all wearing bulletproof vests and carrying the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. The small living room suddenly felt crowded and tense. Catherine Russo, you're under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and operating an unlicensed investment business, Agent Chen announced, approaching Catherine with handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Ben stood frozen in shock, unable to process what was happening. There has to be some mistake, he kept repeating. Catherine runs a legitimate business. She helps people with investments. Agent Martinez turned to Ben with genuine sympathy. Mr. Whitfield, your wife has been operating a Ponzi scheme that has defrauded over 40 elderly victims of more than $50 million. We've been investigating her for over a year. That's impossible, Ben said, his voice rising. Show me proof. Show me evidence. Agent Chen began displaying the same documents they'd shown me at the wedding. Bank records, victim testimonies, evidence of Catherine's false identities and fabricated business credentials. As the evidence mounted, I watched my son's world collapse in real time. Mom, Ben said, turning to me with dawning realization, how do they know to come here? How did they know about the investment meeting? The moment I'd been dreading had arrived. I had to tell my son that I'd been working with the FBI to expose his wife, that I'd known for months that the woman he loved was a criminal. Ben, I've been cooperating with the FBI since your wedding day, I said, my voice barely steady. They told me what Catherine really was, and I helped them gather evidence to stop her from stealing from more people.
Protect me? You destroyed my marriage. You destroyed my life. Agent Martinez tried to intervene. Mr. Whitfield, your mother likely saved you from losing everything. Catherine had already stolen from you and was planning to take your mother's retirement savings as well. But Ben wasn't listening. He was staring at Catherine as she was handcuffed, tears streaming down his face. Catherine, tell them this is wrong. Tell them you didn't do this. Catherine looked at Ben with what appeared to be genuine emotion for the first time since I'd known her. Ben, She started, then stopped herself. For a moment, I thought she might actually show some remorse, some acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and looked directly at me. You bitter old woman, she said, her voice cold and filled with venom. You couldn't stand that Ben found someone successful and beautiful. You destroyed your own family out of jealousy. Even facing arrest, even caught red-handed with evidence of her crimes, Catherine was still trying to manipulate the situation and turn Ben against me. As the FBI processed Catherine's arrest, Agent Chen began explaining to Ben the full scope of his wife's crimes and deception. Each revelation was like another blow to my son's already shattered psyche. Mr. Whitfield, the woman you married isn't who she claimed to be, Agent Chen said gently but firmly. Her real name is Catherine Russo. She's never lived in Spain, never operated a legitimate investment business, and has been systematically stealing from elderly victims for over 7 years. They showed Ben the evidence of Catherine's previous marriages to other targets, her false identity documents, and recordings of her discussing him and our family as nothing more than marks to be exploited. She's been married 3 times before, Agent Martinez explained. Each marriage ended when she drained her husband's accounts and moved on to the next location. You're not her first teacher, Mr. Whitfield. She specifically targets men in your profession because teachers have steady incomes and pension funds, but typically lack sophisticated knowledge about complex investments. Ben listened in stunned silence as the agents revealed how Catherine had destroyed his credit, accessing his accounts without permission and manipulating him into taking on massive debt that would take years to repay. Your credit card debt currently stands at $87,000, Agent Chen said, showing Ben printed statements. The personal loans total another $45,000. All of this debt was accumulated through Catherine's manipulation of your spending habits and financial decisions. They showed him evidence of Catherine's systematic theft from his accounts, small withdrawals and transfers that had totaled over $15,000 over the past 2 years, money he'd never missed because Catherine had been so careful to keep the amounts below his normal spending patterns. The engagement ring you bought cost $38,000. Catherine convinced you to finance it through a jewelry store that charges 24% annual interest. At your current payment rate, you'll be paying for that ring for the next 12 years. Each financial revelation hit Ben like a physical blow. The Hawaiian honeymoon that had created such beautiful memories had cost $22,000, all charged to credit cards that Ben would be paying off for years. The expensive dinners, weekend trips, and gifts that Catherine had insisted he pay for had systematically destroyed his financial stability. But what about her business? Ben asked desperately. What about her clients, the people at our wedding? The people at your wedding were victims, Agent Chen replied. Catherine brought them to create the illusion of success and satisfied clients. Most of them have lost their life savings and don't even realize it yet because she's been sending them fake statements showing fictional profits. They showed Ben footage from the wedding reception, elderly victims thanking Catherine for her investment expertise while having no idea they'd been financially destroyed. Margaret Patterson, who'd complimented Catherine's abilities, had actually lost over $340,000. Robert Chen, who'd spoken about planning a European cruise, had been systematically drained of his wife's life insurance money. Your mother's cooperation allowed us to catch Catherine in the act of attempting to defraud her. We have recordings of Catherine making false promises about investment returns and documentation showing that the money would have gone directly into her personal accounts rather than any legitimate investments. But perhaps the most devastating revelation was the recording of Catherine discussing Ben and I with her criminal associates. Agent Chen played the audio, where Catherine called Ben a small-town teacher who thinks he won the lottery and described me as the old woman who would be easy to manipulate out of my retirement savings. She never loved you, Agent Chen said gently as possible. The entire relationship was a calculated effort to access your family's financial resources. Every gesture of affection, every shared moment, every expression of love, it was all part of a long-term fraud scheme. Ben broke down completely, sobbing as the reality of his situation finally penetrated. The woman he'd loved, the marriage he'd celebrated, the future he'd planned, none of it had been real. He'd been nothing more than a tool in Catherine's criminal enterprise. I don't understand, he kept repeating. She seemed so genuine. She knew so much about me, cared about my work, supported my dreams.
Sociopaths are extremely skilled at mimicking genuine emotions, Agent Martinez explained. Catherine studied you extensively before making contact. She knew about your father's death, your close relationship with your mother, your financial insecurities. She crafted her personality specifically to appeal to your psychological needs. The agents also revealed that Catherine had been maintaining relationships with her previous victims even after moving to new locations, sometimes for years, sending them small payments to maintain the illusion that their investments were still growing. She's still receiving monthly thank you notes from victims in California who have no idea their principal is gone, Agent Chen said. Catherine kept their trust even while she was stealing from new victims here in Oregon. As Catherine was led away in handcuffs, she made one final attempt to manipulate the situation. She asked to speak privately with Ben, claiming she had important information that could explain everything. "Don't let her near him," I said quickly. "She's just going to try to manipulate him more." But Ben, despite everything he'd learned,
still wanted to hear what Catherine had to say. The emotional bonds she'd created were so strong that even documented evidence of her crimes couldn't immediately break her psychological hold over him. "Let me talk to her," Ben insisted. "I need to understand how this happened." Agent Chen allowed a brief, supervised conversation in the apartment hallway. I could hear Catherine's voice through the thin walls, still trying to work her magic even while facing federal charges. "Ben, you have to understand, I never meant for things to go this far," she said, her voice soft and pleading. "The business started legitimately, but market conditions changed and I had to make some difficult decisions to protect my clients." Even now, she was lying, trying to frame her criminal enterprise as a series of unfortunate business decisions rather than deliberate fraud. "I love you, Ben. Everything I felt for you was real. Yes, I made terrible business decisions, but my feelings for you were genuine. Don't let them turn you against the only real thing in this whole situation." I could hear the pain in Ben's voice as he responded. "How can I believe anything you say? How do I know what was real and what was manipulation? The way I looked at you on our wedding day, that was real. The way I felt when you told me you loved me, that was real. I may have made terrible business decisions, but I never lied about my feelings for you." It was masterful manipulation, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Catherine was reframing her elaborate criminal scheme as business mistakes, while claiming that her emotional manipulation of Ben had been genuine love. When Ben returned from the conversation, he looked even more confused and conflicted than before. "She says she loves me," he told me, his voice breaking. "She says the financial problems were business mistakes, not deliberate fraud." "Ben," I said carefully, "you heard the recordings. You saw the evidence. She's been planning to steal from our family for 3 years. She called you names behind your back and laughed about how easy it would be to manipulate us." But Ben wasn't ready to accept the full truth. The psychological trauma of discovering that his entire marriage was a lie was too much to process all at once. "Maybe there's more to the story," he said desperately. "Maybe she got involved with bad people who forced her into this. Maybe she was trying to protect me somehow." Agent Martinez had warned me this would happen, that victims often created elaborate alternative explanations to avoid accepting the painful reality of their situation. "Mr. Whitfield, we understand this is incredibly difficult to process, but Catherine Russo is a career criminal who has been running these schemes for over 7 years. This wasn't a business that went wrong. It was always intended to be fraud." They showed Ben more evidence: Catherine's previous arrest records, documentation of her multiple false identities, surveillance footage of her maintaining apartments in different cities under different names. She has bank accounts in 4 states and has been running active frauds in Oregon, Washington, and California simultaneously. While she was building a relationship with you, she was also engaged to 2 other men in different cities. This final revelation broke something fundamental in Ben. The realization that he wasn't even Catherine's only romantic target, that she'd been simultaneously manipulating multiple men for financial gain, finally penetrated his psychological defenses. "She was engaged to other people?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "A retired contractor in Spokane and a government worker in Sacramento," Agent Chen confirmed. Both relationships followed the same pattern: expensive courtships funded by victim money, plans for elaborate weddings, and systematic financial manipulation. Ben sat down heavily, finally beginning to grasp the true scope of Catherine's deception. He wasn't a beloved husband who had been betrayed by business circumstances. He was one of multiple marks being simultaneously exploited by a professional criminal. Over the following months, as Catherine's case moved through the federal court system, the full extent of her criminal enterprise became clear. The FBI had uncovered evidence of over $50 million in fraudulent activities spanning 7 years and 4 states. Catherine had initially maintained her innocence, claiming that she'd been operating legitimate investment services that had failed due to market conditions beyond her control.
Her lawyers attempted to portray her as a naive businesswoman who'd made poor decisions rather than a deliberate fraudster.
But the evidence was overwhelming. The FBI had documentation of her multiple false identities, recordings of her discussing victims in derogatory terms, and proof that none of the promised investments had ever existed. Bank records showed that victim funds had gone directly to personal expenses, rent, cars, jewelry, vacations, and the elaborate lifestyle she'd used to attract new targets. During the legal proceedings, I learned even more disturbing details about Catherine's methods. She'd been using dating apps and social media to identify potential targets, specifically searching for recently widowed retirees and unmarried men with stable incomes. She'd maintained detailed files on each target, including their psychological vulnerabilities, financial assets, and family relationships. Catherine Russo is one of the most sophisticated financial predators we've encountered, the federal prosecutor explained during one of our meetings. She combined traditional romance scam techniques with advanced knowledge of investment terminology and psychological manipulation. Her ability to maintain multiple false identities and simultaneous relationships was extraordinary. The most heartbreaking aspect of the case was meeting other victims and their families. Catherine had destroyed dozens of lives, not just through financial theft, but through the deep psychological trauma of betrayed trust. Elderly victims who'd lost their life savings struggled with depression and feelings of humiliation. Family members felt guilty for not recognizing the warning signs. Ben attended some of the court proceedings, still trying to reconcile the woman he'd loved with the criminal being prosecuted. Watching victim impact statements was particularly difficult for him. Hearing elderly retirees describe how Catherine's theft had forced them to choose between medication and food, how they'd lost their homes and been separated from their families. "I keep thinking about our wedding day," Ben told me after one particularly emotional court session. "All those people congratulating us, telling me how lucky I was. They were her victims, and I had no idea they were celebrating their own financial destruction." The psychological impact on Ben was severe. He struggled with depression, anxiety, and a profound sense of betrayal that extended beyond Catherine to include his own judgment and decision-making abilities. He questioned every memory of their relationship, wondering what had been genuine and what had been calculated manipulation. "How do I trust anyone again?" he asked during one of our difficult conversations. "If I could be so completely deceived by someone I lived with, loved, planned a future with, how do I know what's real anymore?" Ben also struggled with anger toward me for my role in exposing Catherine. Even though he intellectually understood that I'd been trying to protect him and other potential victims, emotionally, he felt that I'd betrayed him by working with the FBI instead of confiding in him. "You let me go on my honeymoon, knowing my wife was a criminal," he said during one particularly painful argument. "You let me talk about our future together, about starting a family, about buying a house, all while knowing it was built on lies." I tried to explain that revealing the investigation would have endangered the case and allowed Catherine to escape to victimize other families, but Ben wasn't ready to hear those explanations. The pain of his betrayal was too fresh, too overwhelming. "Maybe she would have changed," he said desperately. "Maybe if I'd known the truth, I could have helped her become the person she pretended to be." This was perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of Ben's recovery. His continued belief that some part of Catherine's feelings for him had been genuine, that the relationship could have been salvaged if only circumstances had been different. Catherine ultimately accepted a plea agreement to avoid a lengthy trial, pleading guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud, money laundering, and operating an unlicensed investment business. She was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $50 million in restitution to her victims. Money that would never be fully recovered, since most of it had been spent on her lavish lifestyle or hidden in offshore accounts. During her sentencing hearing, Catherine was given the opportunity to address her victims.
Many of us expected some expression of remorse or acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. Instead, Catherine delivered a statement that revealed her true nature more clearly than any evidence the FBI had gathered. I want to apologize to anyone who feels hurt by my actions. I was trying to help people achieve better financial outcomes, and I made some poor business decisions that led to losses. I never intended to cause harm, and I hope that in time, people will understand that my motives were good, even if my methods were flawed. Even facing 15 years in prison, Catherine couldn't bring herself to admit the truth about her crimes. She continued to frame her systematic theft as misguided business practices, her elaborate lies as ambitious but failed investment strategies. The impact of her statement on the victims was profound. Many had hoped for some acknowledgement of the deliberate nature of her crimes, some recognition of the pain and trauma she had caused. Instead, they received a carefully worded non-apology that took no responsibility for the systematic destruction of their financial security.
Ben was particularly devastated by Catherine's final statement. "She still can't tell the truth," he said afterward. "Even now, even facing prison, she's still lying about what she did to all of us." It was this final deception that finally broke Catherine's psychological hold over Ben. Hearing her blame the victims for feeling hurt, rather than acknowledging the deliberate nature of her crimes, allowed him to begin seeing her clearly for the first time. The financial recovery was lengthy and painful. Ben's credit was destroyed, and he faced years of debt repayment from Catherine's manipulation of his finances. The FBI helped him understand what had been legitimate relationship expenses versus systematic theft, but the damage to his financial stability was severe. "I'll be paying for this marriage for the next 10 years, Ben said during one of our conversations about his financial situation. "Every month when I make those credit card payments, I'll be reminded of how completely I was fooled." The emotional recovery was even more challenging. Ben entered therapy to deal with the trauma of psychological manipulation and the difficulty of rebuilding his ability to trust others. The counselors explained that victims of romance scams often struggled for years with self-doubt and relationship anxiety. The cruelest part of what Catherine did wasn't stealing money, Ben's therapist explained to me during a family session. It was stealing Ben's ability to trust his own judgment about people. That kind of psychological damage can take years to heal. Slowly, painfully, our family began to rebuild. Ben and I worked through his anger about my cooperation with the FBI, eventually reaching an understanding that I'd been faced with an impossible choice between protecting him and protecting future victims. "I understand why you did what you did," Ben told me during one of our Sunday dinners, which we'd resumed several months after Catherine's sentencing. "I just wish there had been another way. Some way to save our family without destroying my marriage." "Your marriage was already destroyed," I replied gently. "Catherine destroyed it the day she decided to see you as a target rather than a person to love. We just revealed the destruction that was already there." 2 years after Catherine's arrest, Ben was finally beginning to date again, though he approached new relationships with careful caution. He'd learned to recognize the warning signs of manipulation, to value transparency over excitement, to build relationships slowly rather than rushing into intense emotional connections. I'm different now. More suspicious, maybe. More cynical. But also more careful about protecting myself and the people I care about. The victim community that emerged from Catherine's crimes became a source of support and healing for many of us. We met regularly to share our experiences, help each other navigate the legal process, and work toward preventing similar crimes against other families. I established a foundation focused on educating families about financial fraud, particularly targeting communities where scammers were likely to operate. We developed educational programs for teachers, retirees, and their families about recognizing and preventing romance scams and investment fraud. Every family that learns to recognize these warning signs is a family that Catherine and criminals like her can't destroy.
Knowledge is the best protection against predators who exploit trust and emotion for financial gain. 5 years after that devastating wedding day, when the FBI first told me who Catherine really was, I can say that our family survived. We're different, more cautious, more protective of each other, more aware of how evil can disguise itself as love and success. But we survived, and we've used our experience to help protect others. Then eventually remarried, a fellow teacher who appreciated his kindness and shared his values. Their relationship developed slowly, built on transparency and mutual respect, rather than the intensity and manipulation that had characterized his marriage to Catherine. Watching him find genuine love after such betrayal was one of the most healing experiences of my life. Catherine remains in federal prison, where she'll stay for many more years. The FBI continues to investigate her activities, occasionally discovering new victims or additional evidence of crimes we hadn't known about. She continues to maintain her innocence in prison interviews, still claiming that she was a legitimate businesswoman who made poor decisions rather than a deliberate criminal. For those of you watching my story from around the world, I hope you'll remember that trust is precious, but shouldn't be naive. Love is beautiful, but shouldn't be blind. And family protection sometimes requires difficult decisions that feel like betrayal, but are actually the deepest form of love. The most important lesson I learned is that evil often wears a beautiful disguise, and the people who seem most successful and generous may be the ones we need to guard against most carefully. But I also learned that families can survive even the deepest betrayals if we're willing to face the truth together and support each other through the difficult process of healing. Thank you for following my story to the end. If you've experienced something similar, please know that you're not alone and recovery is possible. Comment below and let me know what country you're watching from. Knowing how far this message travels gives me hope that other families might be protected from predators like Catherine Russo. The truth may be painful, but it's always worth fighting for.